Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and in the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of all of living nature, of which we're an integral part, and with deep gratitude to all of our ancestors that have brought us to the present moment, I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we complete a 10-day program on nonviolence. Over the last 10 days, we have traversed many domains, from the theoretical aspects of nonviolence, spiritual depth from which nonviolence emerges. We've looked at activism all over the world in different domains in which nonviolence has been applied to gain human rights, to enhance social justice, to broaden our collective sense of how we need to respect and honor diversity in a compassionate and empathetic way. We have had synchronistically the opportunity to understand both the complexities of the relationship between violence and nonviolence, and also the utility of nonviolence by looking at frontline situations, and in particular, the situation in Iran that was so powerfully focalized by the death of Mahsa Amini some weeks ago, a 22-year-old Kurdish woman who was essentially beaten to death by the morality police in Tehran for not having her hijab correctly situated on her head. And so this has been a very dimensionalized discussion. And today we want to bring it to a close. And with deep gratitude and thanks to all of you in our global audience that have contributed and participated, it's been a very, very powerful exploration of something that all of us as human beings carry in our hearts, are challenged to implement in our daily lives, because it seems like violence and coercion reigns supreme, but nevertheless is a fire in all of our souls that inspires us to find a better way of aligning ourselves with the larger ecology, a better way of treating each other and living together, because all of us know that in our essence, we're all one. And if it's all one, then nonviolence is the only pathway. So it's in that spirit I want to welcome back Banafsheh Sayad, who's from Persia, whose family lived before the revolution in 1979, was exiled, and someone who has been passionate about the situation over there and has been bringing to our attention day by day the events surrounding Mahsa Amini's death and the reverberation around the world as we've been experiencing a George Floyd moment, again crystallized in the tragedy of a senseless death of an innocent. So Banafsheh, thank you so much for everything you've done to contribute to this program, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you, everyone. Hello to you. I just want to say a few words about what is happening, even though the news, it's very sporadic. The government is severely restricting the internet access in Iran. But amid ongoing protests, many Iranians are mourning dozens of teens and young people as names and details of the brutality against them emerge on different outlets, social media outlets. At least 154 protesters, including 9 children, have been killed by security forces during the recent protests. Very little is known about most of the victims, as families are pressured to stay silent if they want the bodies of their loved ones to be handed over to them. On Monday, security forces stole the body of the 16-year-old Nika Shahkarami from the morgue while her family were waiting at a cemetery for the body to arrive. they buried the young woman. The security forces buried the young girl in a village about 40 kilometers away, supposedly to prevent her funeral from turning into a protest, just like Mahsa Amini's funeral turned into a protest. Nika was last heard from when she called a friend on September 20th, saying she was being chased by security forces in Tehran during a protest against the killing of Mahsa Amini. Another 16-year-old girl, Sarina Esmailizadeh, also died after being severely beaten on the head with batons a week after taking part in demonstrations in Tehran. This regime has denied killing both girls and blamed their death. Some have been blaming it on suicide and others on homicide. That's not linked with the regime. Many teenage girls are protesting, and they have been repeatedly beaten on the streets in public. And over 100 protesters are held, female protesters, in one of Tehran's prisons. And they've been systematically abused and kept in inhumane conditions since their arrest 2 weeks ago. Their average age is 15. They have been strip searched, repeatedly interrogated, threatened by interrogations with they've been denied phone calls to their families, and these detainees are kept indoors in unsanitary conditions, we are told, throughout this time. And the lights are always on and never turned off in the shed where they're kept, where there's only 3 toilets and no showers. The chant that many of you have heard that is at the core of this movement is woman, life, liberty, which comes from the Kurdish freedom movement and is a result of decades of grassroots activities and efforts of Kurdish women in one of the most economically deprived regions of Iran, which is the Kurdish provinces. The Kurdish women of Kurdistan in Iran and Turkey use this slogan for the first time. And the leader of the emancipatory Kurdish movement in 1998 gave a very famous speech in which he said that women are basically the first captives in history, and until they're not liberated, until they are not liberated, and no emancipatory movement, in fact, will be doomed. The emancipatory movements will be, in fact, doomed to fail unless the women are liberated. This time around, woman, life, liberty was chanted by those who attended Mahsa Amini's funeral in the city of Saqqez in Kurdistan, and it has spread across the nation and in all the protests that we've had outside of Iran. Another core chant that has emerged is, "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid, we stand together." And despite the crackdown by the regime, people have been called to a nationwide protest this coming Saturday. But as the situation escalates in Iran, the regime, cracking down on people, we in the conscious community need to also escalate our ability to energetically impact the situation. A group of us are organizing mass meditations based on a request from some of the young women in Iran who are mobilizing the protests. When we asked, a few of us who are in touch with them, when we asked them, what do you want from us outside of Iran? What do you want us to do in support of this movement that you have started? And they said mass meditations to raise the vibration of the world, not just Iran. but the world. So we can collectively transition from the old story of patriarchy and dominance to a story of interconnectedness and cooperation. And we need to release the old story as a collective, obviously. And one part of this old story, one big aspect of it, is how enmeshed we become in the 3D world and all the dramas, and forget that we have a higher, more expansive and vaster dimension as human beings. The more we realize this vaster dimension and elevate ourselves to our higher levels of being, the more we can elevate the 3D world and ease the conflicts from this level instead of operating in the midst of it. We rise above it and observe the events and then take action in the 3D world from this higher perspective. So I will keep you posted, we will keep you posted regarding the mass meditation that we're organizing. But for now, I invite our group, as we focus on breathing coherently, which has been a ritual on Humanity Rising for a while now, the slow nasal breathing, devoting 5.5 seconds to our inhale and 5.5 seconds to our exhale, that brings a balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic aspects of our autonomic nervous system, between the doing, yang, and the being, yin aspects of ourselves. I invite us to beam the light of love and protection for the brave girls, women, and men in Iran who are standing up for freedom, autonomy, and justice without fear for their lives, and hold the possibility of a shift in consciousness in those taking orders from the leadership of Iran to open fire and treat these brave young people with brutality. Hold the possibility of a shift in their consciousness. So please sit comfortably, sense the ground lovingly with both feet. Relax and release your weight onto what you're sitting on, and maintain a vertical posture with ease, letting your torso lift and elongate without tension. And if you wish, rest the back of your hands on your lap. The bells we will hear will indicate when to inhale and when to exhale. And the image you will see is the 5-petaled flower created from the dance of Earth and Venus orbiting the sun. I invite you to close your eyes after you take in this image, and let the breathing bring you into a spaciousness and peace. Yes, please do share the video. We actually don't have audio. Can you play that again? Please continue breathing, your eyes closed, and feel how we on this call are breathing together from different parts of the world, taking in the precious life force, the presence of the divine, breathing out love. In essence, all of life breathes together. We just forget that. And feel how with each breath, the heart of humanity expands. And we begin to remember our true nature as love. Please join me in holding the possibility of the softening of the hearts of the people in leadership, in the militia, in the army in Iran, those who are fighting on behalf of this regime, that they awaken their conscience and see it is their own children they're fighting and killing. The future. May they realize that they need to protect them, love them, listen to them. And let's together hold the safe passage of the brave souls of these young people, children, teens, rising up. Let's hold their safe passage through this turbulence and envision freedom, justice, and peace once again permeating the world, starting from the ancient land of Persia, in the name of love. And so it is. Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to now turn the mic over to Tom Eddington. Tom.
Thank you, Banafshe. It's been just so wonderful to have you with us last week and this week, and making the connection with the people of Iran and letting them know that we are thinking of them, we are there. Hopefully there's been inspiration and hope and insight from the variety of panelists we've had, and just to help reinforce that nonviolence isn't some kind of theoretical thing, but it's real and can have a successful outcome. So thank you again for everything, your updates and your messages and the meditation. It's been wonderful having you with us, and please stay with us today if you can. I'd like to invite Michael Nagler to join us. Michael is a professor of classics and comparative literature emeritus at the University of California, Berkeley, and teaches in a peace and conflict studies program he founded on the campus in the 1970s. In addition to teaching at Berkeley, he speaks frequently for media and the general public on issues of peace and nonviolence, and does presentations all over the world for the Blue Mountain Center of Meditation. Michael's written 6 books and contributes articles frequently to Tikkun and Yes Magazine and other progressive journals. He's consulted for the U.S. Institute of Peace and many organizations and projects dealing with nonviolence and world peace. Michael's the founder, president of the Metta Center, and director of the Third Harmony, which we'll be screening tomorrow. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's, it is heartbreaking, but wonderful to be here. And I do have a very strong feeling that the world is going through a crisis, which is not just in the streets of Tehran and so forth, but This is a global crisis. It is a clear failure of the international community as a peace system. And I think we have to hold the hope that out of the wreckage of what's happening in Iran, which is like one of the most vivid and unbearable displays of human violence, excuse me, display of human violence that has shown how intolerable and how wrong it is. Out of the wreckage of World War I, a global, European organization was founded called the League of Nations. That was a wreckage of World War II. We had the United Nations. I think we have to do something that's much deeper and much broader, so that the spirit of these incredible martyred individuals in Iran will not be in vain. I'm thinking of a story. I don't know, maybe Benafsha, you could possibly help me out here if his story is actually accurate, but in the 79 revolution, there was one, I hear, there was an imam who was speaking, and the army filed into the crowd, took up positions and shot him. And after he fell, another imam stood up and got on the same platform and said, "Where my brother has fallen, I will speak." And this happened something like 4 or 5 times. And finally, the commander of the brigade that had killed these men, well, he was shot by one of his own soldiers, and the soldiers then withdrew. And that was regarded as kind of the climax of the revolution. Now, I don't know, have you heard this story? Do you know if it's true? Is it a typical kind of thing?
Michael, I have not heard this story. There were a lot of stories like this that the revolutionaries, the Islamic revolutionaries, were spreading, and this might have been one of them. I'm not sure if it is true or not.
I see. Well, be that as it may, it's one of those stories that has a truth to it in its kernel, and that is that, and Gandhi put it very well when he was asked, what would you do about the Japanese invasion if they came in? And he said, we would not use violence. We would be slaughtered. But there's a point beyond which no human being can go in terms of inflicting this violence on a fellow human being. We have to take on this suffering to waken them up. And so I sincerely hope that the suffering that's taking place in Iran today will have that effect, not just in Iran but in the whole world, the effect of waking us up, making us realize that we need a new regime based on a new image of who we are as human beings, expressed outwardly in our social institutions and in our government. And nothing less will work anymore.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I'd like to invite Sephora Arbab to join us. Sephora is based in Los Angeles, but has been traveling and is joining us today from Australia. So we're just delighted that you're able to be with us. She is an author, educator, and most importantly, a scholar of feminist nonviolence. And I can't think of a better guest to have on our panel today than Sephora. So Sephora, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And hello, Michael. Hello, Benafsha. It's very nice to see both of you. I'm a little bit coming in at the last moment to join the summit. I did do a presentation on actually the topic of love and its centrality to the framework of nonviolence. And of course, what is happening in Iran is just absolutely heartbreaking, but it's also in a sense where the shift usually happens in the most violent of places. You see the shift towards nonviolence, and that's the very potency, I think, of a both hopeful sign of the human spirit, that it will always push back against violence and not accept it as a norm, and also of nonviolence, right, and of the centrality of love to it. And I'm not sure, Tom, how long I have to speak, whether I should just play the video or should I just sort of summarize in my own words the centrality of love. I would like to speak about that because I think it's very crucial to understand love not in the terms of just sort of a wishy-washy, touchy-feeling kind of thing, but as a very strong, powerful, in the words of James Baldwin, who also was very much focused on bringing love into the American discourse. And he said, it's only when we can love, when the white and the Black American can act like lovers, will racism end. So I want to point to the fact that he goes beyond that and talks of love in very spiritual terms. And love needs to be understood as our connection with the sacred. And all of that has to be brought into the framework of nonviolence. And I just want to, if I have a few moments, to explain what I mean by that. I think it's very, it's a very crucial kind of pivot that points towards, you know, what Michael is calling the new story. So, Tom, how long?
That would be wonderful if you could speak to that. And you know, with this being the culmination of the 2 weeks, you know, we want to be talking about the distinction between nonviolence and peace, and where love fits into both of those. So it would be wonderful if you could share your thoughts on love and how it connects with nonviolence.
Yes, so I'm talking about essentially love, the centrality of love to the framework of nonviolence. So I'd like to emphasize the term of framework of nonviolence, and not nonviolence as merely a strategy or a tactic or something that is just merely opposing violence per se. So if we talk of the framework of nonviolence, we're talking about a whole meaning-making framework. And in that sense, it is a very broad and very ambitious scope that nonviolence has. And it is what Gandhi is actually articulating. But my research is based on a movement that happened alongside with Gandhi in the northwest frontier of British India. And they were called the Khudai Khidmatgar movement, the servants of God. And they were actually organized as an army. They had uniforms. Most people in the province belonged to this army, so that it was a trained. They had training camps, but they were the first peacekeeping army, if you would like to use modern terms, but it was much more than that, because they had multiple ways in which they embodied nonviolence. And so when I'm talking about love, the centrality of love, it comes from my research grounded in a movement that actually took place. So their framework of nonviolence is made synonymous with the Sufi path of enlightenment, of going upon a mendicant's journey and embarking upon the process of taking off the ego identity. And if you will, I'll share just 2 quotes, one from James Baldwin and one from a poem from this movement, and that'll clarify what it is that I'm talking about. So am I able to share my screen or?
Yeah, screen share should be working for you.
Okay. So this is the Khudai Khidmat Gar movement, and you can see it's like a huge, this is 100,000 strong army at that time. And there's multiple reasons for the silencing of the movement and why people don't really recognize it, but it was a very unique phenomena. So it's from their literature that I'm taking this idea of the centrality of love, but I want to also conjoin it with other thinkers that bring it. So I'll start with, this is Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the leader of the movement. I'm going to start with James Baldwin and connect it to the Khudai Khidmat Gar, and I think it'll give a better idea of what it is I mean. So this is James Baldwin's centrality of love to the political, and why love is so crucial. He says, love takes off the masks that we fear we cannot live without, and know we cannot live within. I use the word love not merely in the personal sense, but as a state of being or a state of grace, not in the infantile American sense of being made happy, but in the tough and universal sense of quest and daring and growth. So, and Baldwin conceives that he's talking about love in very spiritual terms. So he's talking about love to be brought into the political sphere in very spiritual terms, because love taking off the masks is almost the same as a spiritual quest where you take off your ego identities in order to commune with the sacred. But we fear that the most because that is the most terrifying thing to do, because we have to face our fears and our prejudices and our hatreds and so on. So it is the thing that we will shun the most, and we will aim toward changing the world from outside, the laws and the governments and anything to not be able to face inward. But love compels us to face inward. But the thing that makes love so compelling and makes us face our fears and impels us to transform is the question as to what that is. And I'm going to go to the next slide for that one. And this is from a poem called Nonviolence, written by a Khudai Khidmat Gar, also a very famous Pashtun poet. And I'm going to read it in Pashto and then I will translate. Nin panive masti mast pakawina da Pukhtun shwa, wale gora ka lela bia tishpamine da Majnu shwa. Today a new intoxication intoxicates the Pakhtun's blood purified. Let's see if Lela can once again abandon herself to Majnu for love alone. So this new intoxication that intoxicates the Khudai Khidmat Gars, they're talking about the framework of nonviolence. And as I mentioned before, the framework of nonviolence is made analogous to the Sufi path of not just the taking off of masks and the ego annihilation in order to purify yourself and make yourself go towards the beloved. That is the impelling you, but it is a form of rapture that once you feel it, nothing else will matter, and that is the motivation and the framework of love that is so crucial to understand in the framework of nonviolence. And so the last two couplets, Layla and Majnu, are a historical pair of lovers, similar to, or a legendary pair of lovers, similar to Romeo and Juliet. But Layla and Majnu also in Sufi poetry and in most of the Muslim world, as well as South Asian world, are also tropes for the mendicant. So Majnu is the mad mendicant who is desiring to become one with the divine Leela. And so Ghani Khan here is sort of pointing to the fact that the Khudai Khidmatgars are bringing love into the political sphere, but will it become a norm? Because of the difficult path that Majnu is taking, he has to annihilate his ego self in order to become one with the divine. But the annihilation here for the Khudai Khidmatgars, because they were practicing nonviolence, is not just a spiritual one, it's also a physical one, because they were facing the colonial government and harsh policing and so on. So the two are not distinguished, whether this is a physical act or this is a spiritual act. And so love can cross those divides that we have created in the political sphere between not just the body and the mind, but the private and the public. And so I'll end with just one more sort of pointer to why love is so important to the framework of nonviolence, from a little bit of a summary from Leila Fernandez's book and Transforming Feminist Practice. And here I'm bringing in my feminist perspective as well as hers. And what we are calling, and Michael, of course, is calling, and Thomas Berry's phrase, the new story, can also be termed a utopian endeavor. Gandhi always looked at utopia as something that nonviolence aspires towards, a blueprint that we have to aspire towards. But what Fernandez is saying in her book is that instead of thinking of utopia as a place, as either a no place or the best of places, which is both the meanings of utopia in the Greek, she says, and I'm quoting from her, utopia can be realized as the moment when suffering is transformed into love. And this is the suffering that the people on the path of nonviolence have to undergo in the midst of all the violence that we are seeing now, of course, in Iran and Afghanistan and many other places at the moment. The moment when suffering is transformed into love, utopia is the labor itself which enables such transformation, not, as is mistakenly assumed, the outcome that results from the labor. So transformation is a constant unfolding process and not an end to be reached, but the means of changing both the self and the world. Transformative action is a utopian project. And so it is a very quick presentation, and I hope it's not too incoherent, but what I'm trying to say is that the inclusion of love into the framework of nonviolence is very central because it pivots how the normative political is structured. We always think that the world needs changing, but it's ourselves that need changing through love. And then once that self-transformation occurs, then it can be reflected out into the world. So I think this pivot is what is kind of crucial to understand. And if utopia especially is a state of being rather than a place.
Thank you, Sephora. I'm just so pleased that you're able to be with us today, and especially with the end of our program after 10 days that we're ending with the message of love. I hold that love is the energy of the universe, and it makes perfect sense to me that that's the part of the message of the last 10 days. So thank you. I'd like to invite Michael and Bonifay and Jim to come back and join us in a panel discussion. So I was going back through my notes over the last 9 days, and it seems impossible to try and make sense of all that was shared. There were so many remarkable highlights. But one area I thought might be interesting to start with is language. And Michael, you and I've had conversations over the years about this term nonviolence, and that it has violence in it, and how that just doesn't feel appropriate. And it feels like we need another word for nonviolence. And you started us last Monday with a conversation around non-violence and nonviolence. And I'm wondering if maybe in the spirit of language, we start there to sort of summarize the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's interesting, Tom. I was just jotting down a quote that means a lot to me, and that kind of summarizes what you've just been saying. It's by a Persian poet who was a rough contemporary of Rumi. His name was Ibn Ansari of Herat, Ansari of Herat. And in my translation, I don't know Farsi, in my translation, there's a beautiful line in one of his poems, which says, "Watch vigilantly the state of your own mind. Love of God begins in harmlessness." So harmlessness is approximately the same as non-violence. But as Ansari points out, that's where it begins. That's where love begins. As Safura was saying, you have to turn against your instinctive inherent violence. It's actually a conditioned overlay of violence. You turn against that to open up, to release the love of God. So I'm sorry, Tom, I've kind of lost the thread. I don't know where we're going now, but that was the thought on my mind when you finished your presentation just now.
Yeah, Michael, you on Monday, you shared the difference between strategic choice versus principled nonviolence.
Yeah, I'm sorry for interrupting you, Tom, but yeah, let me speak to that a little bit, because this really is critical. I would say roughly 85–90% of people who use the term nonviolence or who encounter it think of it as a strategic ploy. And, you know, it's effective up to a point, but merely as a strategic ploy, this is the really critical difference that I've been trying to get at. It cannot shift us systemically from the old story of isolation, separateness, which validates the utility of violence in certain circumstances, to a new story, which is based on unity and love and shared needs that Nipun was talking about yesterday. So there we really have, and it is, it's some language we don't have that captures this positive disposition of the mind. I'm quoting Erasmus here, which makes it impossible for us to be violent towards one another because something much more powerful has taken over. And that is the awareness of unity. And when we reach deep enough in our own being, here's the marvelous secret that it took me about 40 years to get through my skull. When we reach deep enough into our own being, we transcend our separateness and find the same depth of being is in every living creature.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And for me, I think back to last Friday, Hezekiah talked about unity, and Sephora, you bringing in the centrality of love to nonviolence, and it really speaks to, for me at least, that distinction between principled nonviolence and strategic choice. And if we can find that place of love inside ourselves, then we can transcend to that space of principled nonviolence that Michael's speaking to. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, most people, when they try to describe the difference, say that principled nonviolence means nonviolence observed everywhere. But I think that can sometimes be misunderstood to mean strategic nonviolence, the absence of harming, has to be applied everywhere. But it's much deeper than that. That's the part that's being hard for me anyway, to grasp. That it's an all embracing, all encompassing love, which, as Gandhi showed, can sometimes, under extreme examples, under emergency conditions, can show up as harmful force. I used to, when I taught my nonviolence course at the university, it was a year-long course, and I always waited till the second semester to bring in this exception because students would be horrified. What do you mean? But if I were on the school grounds, somewhere here, anywhere in the United States anyway, and I had a weapon, which is pretty much implausible, but let's just speculate. Say I had a weapon. Someone handed me something as I walked onto the school grounds. And here was this unfortunate deranged person who was coming in intending to kill students. My job as a nonviolent person, believe it or not, would be to stop that person. And that's a euphemism. It may actually mean to kill that person to prevent a much larger bloodshed. But it's interesting to note that in more than 50 years of active nonviolence that Gandhi carried out, the situation never arose. So it's nice to have it there as an abstraction to show that nonviolence does not mean capitulating. It does not mean caving in, giving in to violence. And it also shows, in my view, that nonviolence is an inner disposition and really can't be totally predicted or observed in external behavior. So, that's a pretty sophisticated and nuanced attempt to explain what principled nonviolence really means.
Yeah, Michael, you quoted St. Augustine at one point during the week about needing to sacrifice our bestiality within.
Yeah. I'm surprised I only quoted Augustine once this week. But yes, that's a beautiful and so important little discussion in Book 5 of the Confessions, where he talks about all this negativity, bestiality, for example, and says that the real meaning of it is those negative impulses within us. And I have a feeling, everyone, that we've been talking about this the whole 10 days, and I'm not sorry. It's to recognize that the first conversion, the first struggle with violence has to take place within us, or the external struggle will go wrong.
Yeah, that was the other piece of the language conversation I wanted to have today. In addition to the definition of nonviolence, I've been listening throughout the last 9 days and watching in the chat the number of times that the word fight or battle or other what I would hold as violent terms have shown up in our conversation. And for me, it just, I was witnessing that or experiencing it as how deeply seated this old story of human nature is in our unconscious state, in our language. Please, Sephora.
Yeah, I would like to speak to that in regards to the Khudai Khatmatgars, because they did call themselves an army, and for them, nonviolence was a battle. But the battle was on both levels. So the inner battle, the self-transformative battle, but also battle against, so Ghaffar Khan or Badshah Khan was also considered a warrior figure, as a Pashtun warrior figure in a lineage of other resistance warrior figures. But now, in fact, he's likened in another poem by Ghani Khan to Mansur al-Halaj. So he's likened to a warrior figure, but the Sufi saint Mansur al-Halaj, he is that figure. He is battling for truth, but now battling non-violently. So in a sense, I think that whole idea of valor and courage and honor is taken up but transformed now to nonviolence. And I think that really resonates with people, because it's often thought that nonviolence is pacifism, right? You just don't want to, but if you turn it around and say nonviolence is a very forceful kind of way of saying no, not this, but also this, right? So it's both, the both-handedness that Barbara Demings talks about. And I think we should be talking about it in those terms. And so my way of explaining it is to say it's a framework. It's much broader. It's our whole interpretive way of not just shifting our perspective, but making meaning of the world. And when we shift that meaning-making framework, we can also then create something alternative to it, right? So I absolutely, of course, Michael and I are completely in agreement with the non-hyphenated nonviolence, and it is an inadequate term because it just means, linguistically, it just means an opposition to violence, but it's of course much broader than that, as this summit has shown, especially.
Jim, this has been a bit of a masterclass for you on nonviolence over the last 2 weeks. I'd love to get your take on the experience of what has transpired.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Michael, for putting it together. It's been an amazing 10 days. And Safur, I just want to acknowledge the elegance with which you express yourself.
Oh, thank you.
Something deeply poetic about the way you've expressed the power of love. And I just want to acknowledge it and thank you for coming in. And
thank you.
Particularly since you've been traveling, and all of us on this program know about jet lag. And so doubly want to just acknowledge your self-mastery on today's program. I would make two comments. One, building on what Michael and Safur were just saying, the observation that the Buddha made, which I think for me is a seminal notion, both in terms of metaphysics, but also language. He said that compassion emerges out of the cradle of emptiness. And that's a very powerful notion that Michael and Safur were saying, that was crystallized by the Buddha in a single sentence, that emptiness is the awareness that everything is interconnected, and therefore there's no such thing as an independent self. Anatta. There's no such thing as the independent self, and that once one realizes that, compassion naturally arises for every aspect of your larger identity, which is everything. And that I've always found is an extraordinarily powerful encapsulation of an ideal worth daily commitment to, that any notion of a separate self, any notion of us and them, is ultimately an illusion. And I think Gandhi understood that very powerfully, of course, as did Martin Luther King, and also Nelson Mandela. And I think it's within this context that I would also want to just underscore the point that you made, Michael, which brings us into the heart of what Jung called the antinomial nature of reality. That if you look at the universe, if you look at human reality, it's comprised of opposites. and not just polarities of one against the other, but a multiplicity of opposites. And he defined an antinomy as when there are two mutually exclusive but internal truths that both clash and cohere together at a deep level, that if the person can hold the opposites in a creative tension, it is out of the creative tension that the liberation and the individuation of the soul emerges. And I think, Sephora, that's inherent in what I was understanding as your notion of utopia. It's a process of holding the opposites. And what that means in terms of violence and nonviolence, I think, was exemplified by Gandhi himself, who understood that the example of a necessity for violence came in the world's realization that there was only one way to stop the Nazis. There was only one way to stop the war machine that was now spilling over and taking over Europe, and in an alliance with the Japanese was seeking world domination. And it's worth noting that it was during the Second World War that Gandhi stepped back from his agitation for independence from India, because he said that the British were fighting a noble war. And so, Michael, I think at a level of a concrete example of some of the complexities that we all grapple with, where we understand the necessity of nonviolence, but we also understand that on specific, very rare occasions, someone, as Einstein said, that he would fight for pacifism, as Deanna Rice just put in the chat. Some great souls have urged us to hold that contradiction, what Jung calls the crucifixion of the ego, so that out of that can come the utopia that we think is a possible future. So those would be the two comments that I would bring into this this conversation, because it's such a rich and textured and layered dialogue that we've been having, and it's our capacity, like we've been doing through Banafsheh around Iran. How do we really hold the Iranian people at this moment with these young women, with their bodies, taking off the hijab in a very nonviolent way. Women, life, freedom, but they're doing it in the face of the barrel of a gun. How do we hold this contradiction together and not give into one end of the polarity or the other? That, from a Jungian point of view, is the pathway to redemption.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And a piece of the conversation that's been present for me, I think we've done a remarkable job of bringing so many voices into the conversation over the last 2 weeks. But the iconic figures from history, we talk about Jesus, we talk about Gandhi, we talk about King, we talk about Mandela, and we haven't talked about the iconic women in history who have been figures of nonviolence. And it's been something that's been present for me throughout the last 2 weeks. And I'm wondering, Sephora or Michael, if either of you would like to speak to that.
I can maybe start the ball rolling, Sephora and Banafsheh. There was a startling episode in what is now Western Sahara in the 12th century, where two armies were coming together to have an enormous battle. And one woman, Shahadin, I think her name was, but I might be getting that wrong, simply went in between the two armies and stood there and reminded them by her presence of what they were about to destroy and ended a war. Just stopped it cold. And of course, I have read a book recently about the Jewish women in Poland, particularly in Warsaw, during the war. And once again, it was too late for classic nonviolence in a recognizable form. But Gandhi said that, you know, when you're in a situation like that and you fight to the end, he was willing to call that. And as he said specifically in reference to Poland in World War II, he said, I'm willing to call that almost nonviolence. So once again, I'm afraid we've strayed into a gray area, and I don't want to confuse people. But the fact that nonviolence emanates from within means every now and then it won't be in perfect sync with the outer situation. But we must not confuse the outer behavior with the inner disposition, the awareness, the state of being inside us. Tom, could I have just one more second? I want to
Certainly.
look back to something you said, Jim. When Gandhi stopped the Satyagraha in 1942, for the reason that you mentioned, he also said, I'm doing that. There's no sense in resisting the British now because they won't pay any attention. And to me, that brings up a very interesting idea. You talk about frameworks, Sephora. Very interesting idea that nonviolence is a communication. It's a conversation. So, you know, you offer me violence, there's certain assumptions behind that. I respond with nonviolence. I'm opposing to your set of assumptions a completely different set of assumptions. And so without words, one is having a conversation about what is real, what is our relationship, so forth. And again, I have found that a kind of useful framework every now and then to think of violence, nonviolence as a method of communicating.
Maybe
Okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Sephora.
I'd like to just touch on that question that you raised, Tom, about why the women are invisible, and sort of related to Michael, what you were saying, and also Jim, what you were saying, sort of the interrelatedness of things. I mean, if we're talking about frameworks, obviously there are women who are practicing nonviolence. But nonviolence is also, it's also, I think, misunderstood in many ways because it's denoted as a very exceptional thing, right? Violence is supposed to be the norm, and nonviolence is supposed to be the exception. But is that really the case? And I think Gandhi also spoke to that, right? He said, if we were not nonviolent normally, we would have, the human race would have it would be completely extinguished by now. So in our daily relationships, we practice nonviolence, but we don't recognize it. We don't label it as such. And that relationality, of course, women are very much sort of horizontally related, right? Not to make a stereotype of relationships, but men do sort of have more of a sort of a leadership position, whereas women will relate to the community and each other in a very horizontal and egalitarian way. So I think that that's one of the reasons why women's role in nonviolence is so invisible, because it's so mundane and daily. Whereas men sort of take on the leadership position so that then they're recognized. And here again, I'm falling back upon my own research. As the Khudai Khidmatgar women, there was a huge amount of women, especially poets, who were resisting not colonialism, but their own patriarchy. And that's what they were talking about, that is very synonymous with if you're resisting colonial domination, why are you dominating us? Speaking to their own men. But the women are invisible even within the society that knows about the Khudai Khidmatgars, let alone the Khudai Khidmatgars being invisible. There's a huge amount of reasons for that. Stereotyping, of course, being one of them, because they're Muslims, and Muslims are not supposed to practice nonviolence. So that's a huge part of it. So I think the invisibility is, again, speaking of women, is speaking to a particular kinds of frameworks that have become normal and through which we interpret the world. And this shift is necessary to even look at, recognize something that is different from the norm. So that's what I.
And Michael, picking up on that, when I have studied what happened in Sudan or what's happening in Iran, I mean, it would seem that in fact is what has gone on. There wasn't a individual woman who was leading the work in Sudan. It was many women, and in Iran, my sense, Bonifay, is that that's what's happening there. We've got lots of women who are actively involved. There's not an individual leader.
No. But I wanted to also speak about how, as long and this is what Rumi says, as long as there is violence within, as long as there's a war within, we will see war, we will see violence outside. So this reflecting on what is our inner world. And this goes back to what these women, as I was saying in the beginning, are asking us, these young women in Iran. And this, you can say, is a call from of the perspective of the feminine, of how to respond to this situation. They're calling us to come together and call upon our higher abilities, the higher dimensions in ourselves, to activate that and raise the frequency of the world. So this invitation and this belief that it is the inner that needs to change the outer is coming from these people who are looking at the barrel, down the barrel of the gun. So it's remarkable to understand that the real change comes from the inner state. That's and to quote Rumi, and to respond to you, Jim, when you're talking about the polarities, it is love that can hold the two polarities. It is love that is not in the dual realm. Love is the third force, if you will, that brings the two together, and like Rumi says, out beyond do wrong and right, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. And that field is the field of love. And when we talk about unity consciousness, it is love that brings us into unity consciousness. That's the way to experiencing oneness in a very practical way. It's not just an idea, like Safura was saying. This is real work. And Rumi says love is not, love is the work of warriors. It's not just some kind words. It is really the work of warriors, and extremely difficult undertaking. And he does use the word warrior. بجوشید که ما اهل شعاریم بجز عشق دگر کار نداریم در این خاک در این مزرعه پاک بجز عشق بجز مهر دگر تخم مکاریم. He says, rise up, we're all fellow warriors, and besides love, we have no other task, no other mission. In this land, in this immaculate field of the body, don't plant any seed but love. Don't plant any seed but kindness. So putting this into action, putting these words into action, I mean, it's a direct teaching of how to comport ourselves. But I do have a question for you, Michael, Safura, and Tom, and Jim. you know, when we speak about nonviolence, it is also very deadly. It's deadly on the part of those who are practicing it, right? You know, the one side is shooting at you, and you're practicing nonviolence, but it's deadly. So when you're looking for a term that really describes that, describes nonviolence, I think it also, in some instances, needs to address how it is deadly. So how do you respond to that?
Man.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
That is a great question, Banafshe, and it comes up very often. Someone had even said he was practicing nonviolence, but he got killed. but no one ever says he was practicing violence, but he got killed. And in the full film, which we'll see on Saturday, there's a wonderful statistic that's quoted by Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan, that if you look at the insurrectionary movements that have gone on in the world, you know, the freedom struggles, the big ones that aim at regime change, you can divide them into which ones were nonviolent, speaking now of strategic non-violence, and which ones were violent. And even at that primitive level of nonviolence, where all you're doing is not shooting somebody, you're not harboring any love for them in your heart, but even at that primitive level, the statistics are startling. They're undeniable, that the nonviolent movements are twice as successful as the violent ones. Not only that, they lead to a democratic regime, I think, 10 times more often than violent struggles do. And that's because when you have this nonviolent frequency, this frequency of love that you're injecting into the situation, to borrow your word, Banafshe, it will solve problems that you didn't even think you could be able to touch. And similarly, if you use violence, it will wreck things that you didn't know that you were that you were in danger of wrecking. Now, as for the deadliness, yeah, I think that's the way I would put it. Yes, people do get killed practicing nonviolence, and it would be really misleading of us to say, oh, just be nonviolent and you'll be safe. Not in this world. Yeah, people do get killed. But here's the really important, critical point that I think Martin Luther King made. He said that your death in that circumstance he didn't use the word martyrdom, but your death will be meaningful. Whereas your death in a violent struggle is just a throwaway. The critical difference, if I may say one more word, is the willingness to risk.
Sephora.
Yes, I would. And I think if we're looking at it beyond the physical level, yes, it's deadly. But why is it deadly?
Mm.
Why is non-violence deadly? It's because it points to the system that makes death such a normal thing, right? The policing, the army, the control of governments, and so on. That's what makes it deadly. So it highlights that. It highlights that. So the person who is undergoing the nonviolence is highlighting that framework. Once again, I'm using that terminology. So it's not just about the physical, but why is it that they are being threatened by violence? And why is it that it's okay for it to be deadly? Any encounter that you are trying to change the outside world, why is it deadly? So that is highlighted. Whereas in violence, it's just normal. That's just the way things are. So you make the deadliness normal. It's okay to be deadly in a violent situation, just to put it very simplistically. So that's what the nonviolence is trying to do, even on a strategic basic level that Michael is talking about. And it just highlights that. And so it makes, and the aim is that it will make other people aware of it, including those who are carrying out the violence. Like the soldiers often will turn against firing upon the crowd when they realize what it is that they're doing. So that is sort of the idea. But the main idea is to change the system so that violence is not normal. That's sort of the utopian aim of nonviolence.
Jim, would you like to speak to
Yeah,
Banafsheh?
you're asking the $64,000 question, Banafsheh, and I think the answer eludes us, and we can only live in the question, you know, circumstance by circumstance and life by life, because I think what you're asking is the deepest existential question of why are we here, and what is it that gives a life ultimate meaning. And, you know, I think I'm reminded what came up for me is the story of Martin Luther in the Council of Worms in 1519, when he had nailed the 95 Theses on the door of the church and was hauled up before the Grand Inquisitor. And they laid out the charges and they said, "You're very young. We suggest you sleep on it." And they took him off to his cell and he slept on it all night. And when he came into the room the next day, he made a very simple statement. And he said, "Here I stand. I can do no other." And I think that was true of Rosa Parks when she, taking bus ride after bus ride after bus ride and going to the back of the bus. And one day she just realized, as she said later, I couldn't do it anymore. And in that spirit of I couldn't do it anymore, I think we come to the expression that was given to you, that you expressed on Humanity Rising a couple of days ago, where you said that the young women, they don't have hope, but they know that even in the face of hopelessness, the only thing that's left to them is to act ethically. And I think that leads to the great, profound observation of Martin Luther King, where he said, if you're not, it's not until you're willing to die for something that you begin to live. And I think that's the moment that all of the nonviolent warriors, Sephora, you know, and your quote from Rumi, Banafsheh, I think that's when nonviolence and love becomes a warrior status, where you realize that you're dealing here with powers and principalities. You're dealing with a multiplicity of modalities of being, from violence to nonviolence. And you're caught up in these circumstances occasionally in your life, where the only thing that you can do with any kind of integrity is to take a stand. And in taking that stand, you sacrifice who you are and what you've become on the altar of history. And that is a good in and of itself. And in that act of selflessness and that act of compassion, your life takes on ultimate meaning. And I feel that very strongly with your story at the beginning of the program, that these are young girls. They're teenagers. They're not even of age. And they're so distraught. They're so fed up that they can do nothing else but take off their hijab and expose their beauty to the world. And then whatever happens, then just happens. But that's the summation of the life that they were born to live and sacrifice themselves for. So I think that, to me, is how I try to live in the great question that I think you're asking at a very deep level as we bring this program to a close. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Banafsheh, and thank each of you for for your responses to it. You touch on all of the pieces of what it means to be human for me. Go ahead, Michael.
Tom, one last comment. I'm sure you're all hoping this will be my last comment. It's tacking on to something you said, Jim, and I'm sorry, Banafsheh and Safura, I'm having a senior moment, and I'm forgetting the name of this woman who was regarded as the founder of Sufism.
Rabia.
Rabia. Yeah.
Rabia, of course.
Mm.
So thank you. So I knew you would know. So someone asked Rabia one time, said, "Oh, child of God, is hate the opposite of love?" And she said, "No, love has no opposite."
Mm. 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 That's
It
a
has an
beautiful
yeah.
note with which to close, I think, Michael. And I would just ask each of you just to take a minute or so to just give us a final word, maybe starting with you, Safura, then Banafsheh, Michael, and then Tom. And then we'll close our program. And I thought maybe Banafsheh, you could give us a final benediction and meditation for the young women in Iran. So let's start with you, Safura.
Thank you. I'm such an event, there's so much hopeless sort of news that you're surrounded with all the time, and such an event just suddenly makes you feel alive and stimulated and gives you hope again. But I think for me, the process of going through this very arduous task of self-transformation, of tearing off my own masks, and as I mentioned, it is a constant process. I think that's such a, I mean, we're all doing it, I think, in this circle, certainly in our own ways, of connecting to something much more greater than ourselves. But that connection is so not just necessary, but life-giving. And it keeps the hope alive, because you do realize that there's something much bigger going on, something you can only slightly tap into, and to rid ourselves of sort of the arrogance of thinking that we can fix it all. But if we can just keep that connection open and keep the hope and keep a circle of people growing with that connection, I think whatever needs to come into being will come into being. And I'm very hopeful. I'm an optimist that what is trying to come into being is something that is so wonderful that we can't even conceptualize it right now. Maybe it won't come in our lifetime or even our children's lifetime, but it will, maybe not even on this planet, if this planet is, but there is something else greater going on. And I think what we're trying to do with this very inadequate term, nonviolence, is to speak to that kind of hope and speak to that. So I think the understanding of that is very necessary, and these kinds of events do that. But also this idea of turning inward. We can each of us has those answers within ourselves if we just sit quietly in our different ways and look within us. So that's my utopian endeavor.
Thank you so much, Safura. Thank you so much. Banafsheh, final word.
Well, I read in the chat a few people saying, how do we blend all these wisdoms with the situation of life as it is? And the inspiration from the women in Iran, tune into what is right action for you in every moment. And don't underestimate the power within each and every one of us to create the world that we really want to see and that we want to leave for the generations to come. Every action we take, every word, every thought, every belief has power and has creative power. So how do you use your creativity? What do you entertain? What do you expand in your day-to-day life? That determines the world we live in. So it's not just some others that are doing these things to us, it's all of us that are creating this and taking the responsibility for that. And in continuation of what Safura is saying, to remove the masks, take off the hijab that is keeping you from truly expressing this power within you that can change, that can shift our world, and that can start and generate the new story that we're all talking about. Be a part of that. Be a part of that. And ethical action, every moment. What is the ethical action? What is the right action that you can take? And I started my talks on Humanity Rising with Rumi's birthday on September 30th. And I said, as he asks us to, gamble everything for love. Why are you here? Why are you here? So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Michael.
Gandhi once quoted an English poet, and I'm not sure at the moment which. I know I have a PhD in comparative literature. I'm supposed to know these things, but I've forgotten. But the quote is, the first part of it anyway, is life is an aspiration. And I'm going to slightly change his language for the second part and read it all this way. Life is an aspiration. We are not human yet. And nonviolence is the goal that will make us completely and fully human. That would be my last comment. I promise.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. Tom.
Well, one of our panelists that was supposed to join us this week was Bill McKibben. And much of our focus over the last 2 weeks has been on personal nonviolence within and nonviolence with other. And we heard about peace systems and other things, but we haven't had much about Mother Nature. And Bill, unfortunately, didn't join us because he had to go into hospital for surgery. We did get word this morning that he's okay. He'll be released from the hospital. But I would love to share, literally right before going in the hospital, he recorded a message, and I'd like to play that. It will take us a bit over, but I think it's a wonderful message to leave us with in part. So let me see if I can share my screen and play this.
Hello, friends. It's Bill McKibben. I'm joining you via pre-recording instead of virtually live because I'm in the hospital. As this great session transpires, I wish I was there in physical person, to tell you the truth, and not just because it would mean I wasn't in the hospital, because it's so exciting what Michael and y'all have been doing here. First of all, just the chance to work with Michael Nagler is, just a true revelatory experience. Very few people who understand this literature, this history, this set of ideas with the same kind of insight, passion, commitment, and just plain all around intelligence. And so let me add my little part. I think I've written in recent years that the two great technological inventions of the 20th century that we're going to rely on if we make it through the 21st, an open question, are the solar panel and the nonviolent social movement. The solar panel allows us the possibility of freeing our energy system from a dependence on fossil fuel that A, kills 9 million people a year who breathe the pollution it produces, B, endlessly enables autocrats, the most current and telling example, Vladimir Putin, to do bad things, but you could sub in the Koch brothers or the King of Saudi Arabia or a lot of other people. And three, of course, most powerfully, destroys the planet's climate system. This is the biggest thing humans have ever done by far, raising the temperature of the Earth by altering its chemistry. Everything else we've done is dwarfed by comparison. And the irony is we don't need to do it. We have these technologies, the solar panel chief among them, that allow us to do the right thing. So the question is, why aren't we doing the right thing at the pace we should be? And the answer is, as it has been for a very long time, the extreme vested interest of the fossil fuel industry. I'm not even going to go on because it just gets me riled up. But suffice it to say that we've wasted 30 years because of their commitment to a disinformation campaign in service of maintaining their business model a couple more decades. Standing up to them has been most of the work of my adult life. And the tools that have been most useful are the tools of movement building. It's strange to think of nonviolent movements as a technology, perhaps, but I think in many ways it really is a strange technology, one pioneered from the margins, suffragists, Gandhi, Dr. King, and a million others whose names we don't know. For me, most belovedly, Ghaffar Abdul Khan. It's a technology that allows the small and the many to stand up to the mighty and the few. And I've gotten to see it close up used to good effect. The fight against the Keystone Pipeline, which began with the largest civil disobedience action about anything in a long time in this country, was a great pleasure for me to help orchestrate. And then the fossil fuel divestment movement, which often has featured all kinds of direct action, but of course, like Keystone, mostly features all the somewhat more mundane and boring tasks of movement building, all the Facebooking and phone calling and lobbying and holding public meetings and on and on and on. These are the tasks by which we try to protect what is beautiful about this world and what can serve the many in this world from the ignorance and single-minded greed of the very few who are insisting on taking us down. I venture no particular guess as to how it's all going to come out, only that the odds are much better if we build ever bigger movements. And I will just say that the work I'm doing at the moment is to expand that movement building into the realm of old people like me. We think of movement building as something that mostly young people do. And in the case of climate change, that's largely been true. I mean, I started 350.org, the first iteration of the global climate movement, when I was in my 40s, but my 7 colleagues were all in college. We've seen Greta Thunberg and her unbelievable work, and there are 10,000 Greta Thunbergs, and they have 10 million followers all over the world, which is great. Kids should be at the lead here. They're going to have to live on this world long after I'm gone. But I heard a few too many people say, oh, it's up to the next generation to solve this. Well, that's as ignoble as it is impractical. There's a lot of structural power left in the 70 million of us Americans over the age of 60, because we vote like crazy and we ended up with a lot of the money. So if we're going to move Washington or Wall Street, it helps to have some people with hairlines like mine engaged in the fight. So we've been building this third act thing, and it's classic movement building, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of heartache when you watch our colleagues go off to jail. We just got a few back day before yesterday from a stint in jail in Virginia, and on and on and on. no guarantees we win, just the guarantee that we fight. And when we fight, we often win. At least we have a chance. So that's, I don't waste a lot of time trying to figure out whether we're going to win or not. My task is to get up in the morning and figure out how much trouble I can make for the oil industry, and hope that there's enough people who join in and we make enough trouble that we move at the pace we need to. Thank you for being a part of this, or a part of all the other noble and beautiful fights underway. And many, many thanks to Michael for helping make those fights so effective and so powerful, with an understanding of this rich, rich historical tradition on which we draw. So thank you all.
Thanks for bringing that in, Tom. Any final word?
I want to thank our 30 or so panelists over the last 2 weeks. Certainly the staff at Humanity Rising for helping make this possible. And without question, Michael, as always, it's such a pleasure collaborating with you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Michael, for co-convening this program. I want to thank all of you, both in our global audience, but those of you who participated. I think it's given us, as Afura said a few moments ago, hope and inspiration, just being part of this conversation. And just for a few moments, remembering who we most essentially are and aspiring to what all of us can manifest in the world of time, space, and causality as we carry this deep ethical principle in our daily lives. Just in closing, I want to just say that next week on Humanity Rising, we're going to be taking up the very critical issue of how we save democracy in the United States. That is another front line in the perennial quest for human dignity and democratic principles. That's going to be convened by George Caponelli. And so that'll be what we'll be diving into next week. And I just want to say that since we started, Humanity Rising, day by day, week by week, has been seeking to inspire people, but within the context of what at the moment is the front line. And what we've seen on the front line over the last several weeks is the Iranian situation and the aftermath of the death of this young woman and other women that have sacrificed their lives. And then we'll turn to the front line in the United States as we approach exactly 1 month from now, a very crucial election. So that's what we do at Humanity Rising, and we're very proud and pleased that we have so many followers from all over the world who are participating in what it is that we seek to achieve as we try to ignite and inspire the human spirit for all of humanity to rise. So it's in that spirit, and in the spirit, Michael, of what you brought in right at the end of Rabia, that love has no opposite, that I'd like to ask Banafsheh to give us just a benediction as we close out our session. Thank you, everyone. Banafsheh.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. I would like to end with this poem by Hafez, and call on all of us to expand love, so that we dissolve what is not love in that expansion. I have come into this world to experience this. People so true to love, they would rather die before speaking an unkind word. People so true, their lives are the beloved's covenant, the promise of hope. I've come into this world to see this, the sword, the gun, drop from men's hands even at the height of their arc of rage, because we have finally realized there is just one flesh we can wound.
Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat. Enjoy your weekend. And just as a reminder, tomorrow, Saturday, we're having a special Humanity Rising session at the same time, 8 o'clock in the morning Pacific time, for a special screening of Tom and Michael's documentary film, The Third Harmony. So we'll see you tomorrow here again on Humanity Rising. And then next week, we'll delve into the crisis of democracy in the United States. Thank you all. This has been so, so rich. And bye for now.